NBC News reports from Berlin tonight that the blockade of West Berlin now exists. The Russians decide from day to day to what degree they want to enforce it. Negro leaders in Montgomery, Alabama, a few hours ago rejected a compromise plan to end a boycott of city buses. The boycott, which has produced some violence, now enters its 15th day.
This is Outlook, reporting news by television. The editor and commentator of Outlook is Chet Huntley.
This has been a major year in American labor history. It was the year of the merger, creating one of the world's biggest middle-class organizations, and the year that 16 tons, a coal miner's wail with overtones of an IWW manifesto, captured the hearts and the nickels of the jukebox brigade. But labor history was made this year with few major strikes. The Kohler strike continued in snarling deadlock in Wisconsin. The Perfect Circle strike begat violence and political upheaval, but little economic gain in Indiana. And the flight engineers of United Airlines spent 7 cold and fruitless weeks on the picket lines. The biggest of the year is still going on. 55,000 employees of the Westinghouse Corporation are in their 65th day of a strike today, the company's first in almost 10 years. Some of the strikers belong to the independent, leftist United Electrical Workers Union. Most belong to the IUE, the biggest union in the industry. Local 401 IUE represents the production workers at the plant in Metuchen, New Jersey.
Local 401. Yes, we do have people available. How many people do you need?
Lou Zimmer is president of the striking local.
We have a committee set up to hear any of our needy cases to see how they can be helped in other ways, such as various bills that may come due. We started just this morning haircuts 3 days a week for the strikers, with Saturdays for the strikers' children. We give gasoline to our pickets who come out and do picket duty. We're planning a kiddie Christmas party, and we're also planning food baskets for the strikers for Christmas.
Metuchen, New Jersey, 1955, is not Harlan County, Kentucky, 1935. The pickets are well-dressed, well-fed, and drive good cars. There is no class animosity. Their strike is less over wages and hours than over standards of work, production quotas, and this year's new word, automation. Automation, which could someday set this assembly line to operating with or without the picketing workers outside. 2,300 are on strike here, and there are no television sets for the Christmas trade. For 65 days, the plant has heard only the whine of the transformer. And supervisors like Gerald Bate have had their pay cut.
My pay has been cut 50%, and I had to retract my Christmas program to keep within my limits, and it's certainly not pleasant at this time of year.
Paul Rotroff is Plant Industrial Relations Manager.
Every morning when I come in, it's a good morning, how are you, and how are things today? About 80% of our workforce are women, many of whom are wives and mothers. They're part of our community. They're people that we associate with in our daily life. Many of our employees are stockholders in Westinghouse. As a matter of fact, we have a back-to-work movement in progress.
Not one employee attempted to cross our picket lines to go back to work after 2 months of strike.
Edward Kelly is plant manager. In Metuchen, he is Westinghouse.
Who signed the contract with our competitor have thus far avoided collective bargaining of any kind on the Westinghouse package offer.
They refuse to offer any wage increase to our employees unless we're willing to take from them a 5-year agreement.
We're digging in, and all management people are taking substantial pay cuts.
How long have you and your husband been out?
2 months now.
You both worked at the plant?
Yes, we did.
What did your husband do?
My husband was a draftsman for Westinghouse.
And what's he done since the strike started?
Well, he's got a part-time job in the lumber yard in Metuchen, unloading boxcarts.
How about you? What do you do?
I haven't done anything at all since the strike has been on. I've been unable to find a job, but I hope to find one.
What did you do at Westinghouse?
I was an inspector on the television line.
And what type of work are you looking for now?
Well, I would take anything right now that I could get.
Most employers don't want to hire people that are on strike. They feel they're going to go back to their old job again, so I guess they just don't want to hire us.
Out of about, I'd say 2,000 or 2,300 employees of Westinghouse, I'd say about a fourth of them were my customers. So far, I haven't seen any of them. In fact, only today, I had a cancellation on a layaway.
How long have you been carrying some of your customers on credit?
Oh, I'd say about 2 months, since the strike started.
And how long do you plan to continue that credit?
Well, we don't want to extend it too far, of course, but I think it'll be all right.
I see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
How many people will you need? This is bakery work. Is that part-time or full-time? Yes, we'll have someone there in the morning. Thank you for calling.
A strike in 1955 differs from a strike in 1935 in spirit, in aims, perhaps in bitterness. But the anatomy of striking is the same. Hot coffee for pickets, food baskets for families in need, and the stopped assembly lines. And as usual in the clash of forces, which is a strike, each side is right until you talk to the other. One additional note. Westinghouse has offered a $100 Christmas loan to any of its striking employees. A rather different Christmas note makes up our letter from Washington, signed, as always, by reporter David Brinkley.
There are almost as many diplomats in Washington as there are reporters, and their job is about the same, to find out what's going on and to get the information back to their employers, whether they are small newspapers or big governments. And the first thing a diplomat or a reporter has to learn in Washington is where to get the news. Here's an example. A new ambassador came to Washington from one of the South American countries, and here's what happened to him. Before he'd had time to install himself in the embassy on Massachusetts Avenue and learn how to work the telephone buttons on his desk, he was getting invitations to cocktail parties, 2, 3, 4 a day. As I said, it's a part of an ambassador's job to socialize around town, get to know people. So for a few weeks, he tried going to all of these parties. Well, he learned what any old-timer could have told him, that the human body and brain cannot take it. So in anxiety and desperation, he sought help. He went to Henri Bonnet, the ambassador from France and a Washington veteran, and here's what Bonnet told him. When you go into a cocktail party, before you do anything else, look around the room and find an exit, preferably one near the back. Then you greet your host and you move over to the bar and pick up a glass, any glass, and move slowly through the room toward the exit. Never change course and never come to a full stop. Speak to people and shake hands, but don't stop to talk. Keep moving. Work toward the exit. When you reach it, you put down your glass or empty it into a potted palm and slip out quietly. You can do this, he said, in about 8 to 12 minutes, and with this system you can cover 2 or 3 parties in one evening and still get home in time for a peaceful dinner. That was the advice from the French ambassador to a newcomer. Then anyone, particularly at this season, caught up in the Washington cocktail party circuit needs this kind of protective mechanism, because the alternative is disaster. A constant hangover, missing dinner every night, and a kind of creeping fatigue. It begins at the feet and slowly moves up through the spine and then spreads outward through the whole body. The origin of the cocktail party is obscure, but it is known to reach its fullest flowering between 5 and 7 o'clock of an evening in your nation's capital. Well, mostly this happens in small rented banquet rooms at the hotels, rooms with names like the Hamilton Room and the Congressional Room. At any hotel, any late afternoon, the hum of voices, the rattle of ice and glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter just a little too loud. The theory around town is that a good deal of business, both public and private, is transacted in these surroundings, and there may be some truth in this, but my experience is that the business actually done at cocktail parties is small, because for business that really matters, it's too crowded and too hot, and the people are too tired. A great many newspaper editorials and speeches on the floor of Congress have railed out against this local private custom, tribal custom. Private groups like the WCTU fear for our future, and actually many of the people you see at these things say they really don't like them either, that they get tired of standing holding a glass in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and trying to talk above the noise to people to whom they really have nothing to say. So the opposition is there, but it is ill-defined and it lacks leadership. So far as anyone in Washington can see now, the outlook for 5 to 7 p.m. remains the same. An unending series of these hot little gatherings in hotel rooms with some of the guests rollicking and laughing, some trying to do a little business, and some trying to sneak out of the back doors.
Thank you, David. Now, I want to take you to a bigger American city, Philadelphia, which was in its time the capital of the United States. This is Philadelphia, a city of more than 2 million. Imagine Philadelphia cut off. Railroad trains, including the Pennsylvania Main Line, would go around the city. Barge and ship traffic on the Delaware River would be stopped. There would be barriers across the Pennsylvania and New Jersey turnpikes and the other major highways. The hinterland would be cut off from the city, depriving it of milk, eggs, and vegetables. Its nearest point of supply would be Harrisburg, 130 miles away. And from Harrisburg, everything would come by air. Food, coal, lumber, clothing, structural steel, everything by air. And always the possibility that the National Guard of New Jersey or eastern Pennsylvania would start using anti-aircraft on the big transports. That's what the word blockade means to West Berlin. This is where West Berlin ends. This communist policeman marks the line between the two zones which divide the world's 8th largest city, the demarcation between two ways of life. Traffic is heavy between the two zones. People cross the border freely. But a West Berliner who crosses the line never knows if he'll come back. West Berlin is an island, a free city 110 miles behind what we call the Iron Curtain. There are about as many people in West Berlin as in Philadelphia, more than 2 million. And it's about as far from West Berlin to its dependable source of supply, West Germany, as it is from Philadelphia to Harrisburg. West Berlin, like Philadelphia, like any city, is fed and supplied by road, by barge traffic, on canals and rivers, and by air. No person, no vehicle, no food, no grain of sand may enter West Berlin without communist permission, unless it comes by air. That is why West Berlin, a huge industrial complex, lives under a psychology of siege. The East German Waterways Commission now issues the barge licenses for all canal transport. Coal is necessary to any city. It is life to West Berlin. Power for electricity, heat for the bitter winters. The communists say they'll not renew the barge licenses when they expire a week from Saturday, so West Germany stockpiles coal. The Autobahn, Hitler's famous superhighway, runs 110 miles from Helmstadt in West Germany to West Berlin. It's a 3-hour ride if you drive fast. Multi-trailer trucks carrying supplies from the hinterlands must be checked by the communists. West Berliners will never forget the 320 days when the Russians imposed a total blockade on the city. Our airlift was Berlin's lifeline. Since the blockade ended in 1949, we and the Berliners have been stockpiling for the next one. The current threat came when the Russians transferred control of all civilian traffic to East Germany. The exact figures of West Berlin's stockpile are secret. The East German communists would like to know. It would help them in their reunification campaign. The stockpiles will keep the city going for at least 6 months in coal, steel, bread, grain, and meat. But the prospect is for minimum rations. West Berlin is a prosperous city. The shelves in the stores are crowded. They come from East Berlin to shop in the West Zone. But all of this is on tolerance. It can end tomorrow. The outdoor market will be first to feel the next blockade. Then the rich farm produce, including sausages from the Berlin hinterlands, will stop. When and if that happens, West Berliners begin digging into their stockpile. During the last blockade, West Berliners woke up each morning with the feeling that just being alive was rather miraculous. Their stamina was amazing. Whether they'll have it next time is anybody's guess. It is not to the economic interest of the communist rulers of East Germany to destroy free Berlin, and they know it. The question is, when will their political interest take precedence over their economic interest? Up to now, the Berlin matter has been the concern of ambassadors and high commissioners, culminating in our own Ambassador Conant's dramatic and defiant automobile ride through East Berlin. Tonight, the mayor of West Berlin has issued an urgent plea. Ambassadors are not enough. Free Berlin must be saved, if at all, at a higher level, perhaps at the very summit of the Big Four. The mayor's plea has changed the nature of the Berlin crisis. Frank Bergholzer reports directly from NBC News, Berlin.
The blockade outlook is less than clear. Lord Mayor Otto Zur called for clarification and suggests this be done at a level higher than that of the ambassadors who have exchanged notes. In the latest exchange, the Russians maintain full authority over right of access to Berlin lies in the communist government recently declared sovereign in East Germany. They make one exception. The Russians retain responsibility for Allied military personnel, but only for the time being. This can be interpreted to mean that a blockade of Berlin now exists, but is simply not being enforced. It may be enforced far more subtly this time, but the goal is unchanged, to force out the West. This is the context in which Berlin's mayor has started this week with a call for a closer look at just what cards each side is holding. This is Frank Bergholzer in Berlin.
This is RCA Communications, off and clear with Berlin at 5:48 a.m. Monday morning, Berlin time.
All over the United States today, people are making news. And tomorrow morning, 50 million homeowners will venture out on 50 million front porches for the morning papers. They want to know what their neighbors have been doing. Well, here is a sampling of local news, big and sometimes small, over America today. We begin with Peter Hackus reporting news of the East Coast from Washington.
Bostonians tonight are grumbling about the Boston Gas Company's announcement they plan to boost gas rates for 300,000 consumers. A formal investigation gets underway tomorrow near Charleston, South Carolina, into the crash of that C-46 mail plane in which 2 men died last night. As of tonight, 40% of the 228 bags of Christmas mail on the plane have been salvaged. Irate New Yorkers, mostly Brooklynites, have been told that the skunk-like odor they smelled today was brought in by the weather. No one knows whence it came, but New Yorkers are blaming New Jersey. Philadelphians tomorrow morning will read of today's tragic death of a 4-year-old boy playing in a lumber yard when a pile of boards fell on top of him. Down in Miami, they're expecting the results tomorrow of a new census expected to show the city has grown from 500,000 in 1950 to 750,000. And in Rhode Island tonight, the big story apparently is a case of too many youngsters and too few policemen to chase them off dangerous thin ice. In the Providence area alone today, 7 children were fished from the icy waters after ill-fated skating forays. This is Peter Hackus in Washington.
This is Chicago, Jim Hurlbut reporting and talking first about the cold weather. Sub-zero temperatures are common in the Midwest and not much relief in sight. A runaway Navy jet plane slipped its moorings at Lincoln Air Force Base in Nebraska, crashed into 4 other planes, left 3 men dead. In Warsaw, Indiana that is, a man who traveled the revival trail with Billy Sunday came today to the end of his trail. Gospel-singing Dr. Homer Rodeheaver died at the age of 75. For the Brody family of Perris, Illinois, there's good news. Surviving Siamese twin Rodney D. Brody, age 4, has come home for Christmas. Here in Chicago, the traffic dispute story to end all such. An off-duty fire captain parked his private automobile, crossed words with a giant crane operator. The big crane lifted the automobile 25 feet up in the air, dropped it kerplunk. The fire captain was pretty unhappy. Jim Hurlbut reporting News of the Midwest from Chicago.
This is Kansas City. Randall Jesse reporting. In the Southwest today, tragedy in Texas. 44 dead by violence in 48 hours. 17 killed in auto accidents, 8 burned to death. 19 other violent deaths in Texas this weekend. Another labor merger may be near. Independent unions representing 2.25 million members began discussing in St. Louis today, pointing toward a merger along AFL-CIO lines. Final decision to be made in February. Tonight in New Orleans, a 12-foot snake is loose. The owner in jail, charged with shoplifting, told officers some pawn tickets were in a rented locker. When officers opened that locker, 2 boa constrictors slithered out. Small one captured, 12-foot one at large in New Orleans tonight. And finally, in St. Louis, a man stole a lamb from a nativity scene. The shepherd said the kidnapper scooped up the lamb in his arms, drove away with the lamb on his lap. St. Louis police have not yet caught the wolf in man's clothing. This is Randall Jesse reporting from the American Southwest from WDAF-TV in Kansas City.
Here in the West, a strike by Western Airlines pilots has been set for Wednesday, but the company says it will offer to lease its equipment to competing airlines to prevent any interruption to Christmas air traffic. Meantime, heavy snow now is hampering highway traffic in parts of Oregon and Washington, while residents of the Imperial Valley in California have had 36 continuous hours of earth shocks. In Arizona, the National Guard has been called out to help reduce traffic accidents in that state. And 2 Christmas season weddings make headlines. Chief Justice and Mrs. Earl Warren are now at Beverly Hills, California for the wedding tomorrow of their daughter Dorothy. In Nevada, Alfred Pine, the other man in the wartime Enoch Arden story involving Airman Daniel Schmidt, now has married 18-year-old Ellen Asher. This is Elmer Peterson with West Coast News, returning you from NBC Los Angeles back across the United States to Chet Huntley in New York.
"250 American veterans have been denied money normally due them for time spent in prisoner of war camps of the enemy. All were prisoners of the communists in North Korea. Under the law, they're supposed to get $2.50 for each day as prisoners of war unless they collaborated with the enemy. Tonight, Senator Henning's Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights reports they were deprived of the money on secret information supplied by the Army without a chance to face their accusers. Only those who appealed, about half, got even a summary of the charges against them. Lasalle elected a new parliament today, and as expected, it was a majority for rejoining Germany. The moderate pro-Germans, those allied with Chancellor Adenauer, were given a narrow margin over the extremists led by a group of former Nazis. State Secretary Dulles came home from the NATO meeting in the midst of protest against administration proposals to double foreign aid appropriations in an election year. And President Eisenhower pressed a gold telegraph key in Gettysburg to turn on the lights of the White House Christmas tree in Washington. The president, looking cheerful and alert, spoke of Christmas as a world symbol of peace. The ceremony was carried on television through NBC's Wide, Wide World. Most Negroes in Montgomery, Alabama, are boycotting the city buses because a woman who refused to take a segregated seat was fined in police court. A Montgomery city ordinance requires segregation on buses and gives drivers police power to enforce the law. In 3 weeks, that law will change on long-haul buses and in public waiting rooms. The Interstate Commerce Commission has ordered the change. The issue may generate as much heat as the Supreme Court ruling abolishing segregated schools. Starting January 10th, therefore, we can expect a great deal of news, space, and time to be devoted to segregation in buses and in waiting rooms. Here, for those who have never seen it, is what segregation looks like. This is Tyler, county seat of Smith County in East Texas, 90 miles from Dallas, 80 from the Louisiana border. Tyler grows rose bushes and pumps oil, both for shipment all over the United States. The population of Tyler is about 40,000. It's a prosperous town, and passengers who come into Tyler by bus are separated according to race. Negroes get off the bus last.
Look, you have a 15-minute rest stop. This is the through bus to Houston, Texas. Watch your step and claim your baggage those leaving the bus. Boy, this must be the road. Don't fall down and go boom out here on the last floor.
One way.
Will you please tell me where the waiting room is?
Colored waiting room?
Yes.
Go out this back door and around to the first double door.
Thank you.
$5. Thank you. What do you think?
I'd like one way footwork, please.
One way footwork.
Go ahead and get it, bud. Like Winter really loves it. Yeah. May I have another hamburger, please?
Anything else?
That malt.
What's later?
And ma'am, no sense about it, because all of it is good.
No.
Never. In case you need that.
You don't need all that foolishness, Miss City.
I'm still hungry. What do you have?
$75, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. Our colored people have their own waiting rooms, their own restrooms. They come around to buy their tickets and return to their waiting rooms. It's always been like that, and they seem to be happy with it, and so are we.
My name is Sarah Keys. I am a hairstylist in a beauty shop at 1926 Amsterdam Avenue in New York City. 3 years ago, in 1952, I was a private first class in the Women's Army Corps. I was stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey. On August 3rd that year, I was given a furlough to go home to visit my parents in Washington, North Carolina. About noon of that day, I got a bus in Trenton, New Jersey. I took a seat about 4 rows back of the driver and sat there, most of the time alone. It was my first long trip on a bus. About midnight, the bus stopped at Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, to change drivers. The new driver told me to move to the back. The bus was crowded and I was tired, and I told him I preferred to stay where I was. He had me arrested, and I was put in jail in Roanoke Rapids. I was all alone in a dirty, dingy cell. I was not told what I was charged with. About 3 o'clock the next afternoon, the chief of police told me I was being charged with disorderly conduct. He told me if I could pay $25, he would let me get out of jail. I paid the $25 and took the next bus home. I sat in the back of the bus. On September 1st, 1952, my father and I filed a case with the Interstate Commerce Commission after it had been rejected by other courts. A few weeks ago, on the day after Thanksgiving, I learned we won. The ICC ruled that if a train or bus crosses state line, we do not have to go to the rear.
In one quarter of the United States today, it is unusual, if not indeed unwise, to call a Negro Mr. If you know him well, you use his first name. If you don't, his last name will do. For his wife or any other of his womenfolk, regardless of her age or yours, the usual form of address is the first name. Next month, there will be unsegregated buses in the South. But it's unlikely that a symbol of racial segregation, such as forms of address, will be changed quite that fast. This is Chet Huntley. Good night.
This has been Outlook, reporting news by television. Outlook is a function of NBC News. This is Bill McCord speaking.
You are not going to permit the NAACP to control your state. And I'll tell you something about all Southern people. We are not going to permit our little children to be used as pawns in a game of power politics to get the racial vote in northern cities. It's been my experience in life that an organized group will have its way against an unorganized group until it steps on enough toes, until it hurts enough people that the other people will set up an organization and either destroy the first one or bring it in balance. And unless we organize in the South, and unless we present a united Southern front, we are going to be crushed. The South has been under attack over this country. Acts of violence hurt the cause of the South. It's used as propaganda against us in other sections of this country. And we can and we will win this fight and win it within the law.
I am Alabama Sam Englehart, also Executive Secretary of the Citizens Council of Alabama. We are dedicated to the preservation of segregation by peaceful and legal means. This we are striving to do. One way to accomplish this is for the whites to refrain from riding the buses. There are other plans in the making that will not be known, or made known rather, until after the first of the year. I can't help but add that federal judges that cracked the door pertaining to these integration questions will, when faced with other integration questions, will open the door wider.
Here in Birmingham today, there's been an intense drive by integration forces headed by the Shuttlesworth on our transportation. The City Commission race comes up May 1st. In the past, especially in the past year, when the Democratic politician down here has been asked, are you for segregation and what shall we do about it? His solution has been this: the people will not stand for integration. But every time the NAACP and the federal government has put the clamps down and the chips are down, he bows his neck and goes along and warns us that we must go along. We're going to have city commissioners in the city of Birmingham, and especially a police commissioner, who will say this to the federal government: your injunction is of no effect. Your federal law has no effect in the city of Birmingham. We will segregate the buses, and if necessary, I shall arrest every agent of the federal government who attempts to conspire to put across integration